It's not a surprise that all of us have colleagues who are excellent in the classroom. They're typically known as master teachers, innovative teachers, those expert pedagogues that students flock to gain from their classes. This morning I am just thrilled to introduce a couple of my colleagues from the University of Michigan who are considered master teachers. Melissa Gross, who is our Director of Innovation for Teaching and Learning in the School of Kinesiology, will be presenting. Melissa has a PhD from UCLA, and actually was initially educated right up the road in Boulder, Colorado. So Melissa's home. Melissa has the distinction of receiving one of the university's top teaching honors, the Arthur Thurnau Excellence in Teaching Award, which is a career-long award which will stick by Melissa as long as she's at the University of Michigan. A Thurnau professor is one that has great status at the University of Michigan. Pete Bodary is our clinical assistant professor, background in exercise physiology, PhD from the University of South Carolina. And Pete is one of those professors who goes above and beyond in all of his teaching. He teaches one of our major heavy enrolled classes, about 250 students a semester, in exercise, nutrition, and weight control. A very popular course, and beyond his coursework in exercise physiology with both our movement science program and health and fitness program. You can read their profiles in our program, but please know that these two individuals center their teaching around active learning and the active learning platform, and this morning you'll learn a lot about that. As you'll learn, their teaching is transformative and embraces risk, discovery, and experimentation that goes well beyond the traditional approaches in teaching. And again, you'll learn about that in a second. You know, Michigan is bragging a little bit, typically known for its excellence in research. But I can tell you, having witnessed these two people teach, Michigan also takes a lot of pride in what happens in the classroom. And we are very fortunate to have Melissa Gross and Pete Bodary with us this morning. So please welcome Melissa and Pete.
Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I want you to be aware of who your presenters are. One of us is a baby boomer, and one of us is a Gen Xer, so please adjust your expectations accordingly. Okay. The world is changing. We heard a lot about that yesterday, and the needs of our 21st century students are changing as well. Employers want individuals who can think critically, who can communicate clearly, who can solve complex problems. And on top of that, these individuals need to have intercultural skills, be creative and innovative, be able to apply their knowledge in real-world situations. But the educational structures that are in place right now to educate these individuals were really created largely at the turn of the last century, at the beginning of the 20th century. And so we have really a one-size-fits-all model of our students. We have standardized curricula, majors, credit hours, and the all-important GPA. So those structures might not actually be optimal for the 21st century student. And in fact, national organizations are calling for change and for improvement in higher education. Well, it also turns out that the burden of this change is likely to fall squarely on the shoulders of faculty members, who are the people on the ground making change. So what is it that these faculty members might be expected to do? Well, invent new ways to develop academic, practical, and civic skills and knowledge in all of the learners and all the varieties that they present themselves to us today. Somehow manage to find the time to prioritize teaching and learning. Learn to leverage digital technologies and deliver competency-based education, and oh, by the way, of course, do scholarship about it, measure and strengthen the quality of student learning. So our faculty are going to respond to those challenges very much dependent on what their local context is. At the University of Michigan, we're working in an environment of a large public research university that emphasizes really the residential experience. And so faculty there are not typically being asked to deliver online courses to lots of people, but lots of students, but they're feeling this tension of where do I put my limited effort, in my research program or somehow in prioritizing teaching and learning. Our School of Kinesiology has 4 different programs in it for the undergraduates: movement science and sport management, as well as athletic training and health and fitness. So each of these programs has its own different disciplinary culture, and the students in those programs have a variety of professional aspirations. They come with different backgrounds, different expectations, and different preparedness. So how can one model of innovation wrap itself around this particular context? Well, it likely can't. So we've been experimenting with a number of different models to meet the needs of our contemporary students. So we're going to talk today about active learning, blended learning, and something called gameful learning. So active learning, I'm sure you're aware of, it occurs when students are engaged in the learning process and are actively involved in their learning. So of course this happens kind of naturally in a laboratory-based setting or in some of the experiential learning settings that were talked about yesterday. But it can also happen in a traditional lecture class. For example, an instructor can add clicker questions or deploy think, pair, share activities or write minute papers. There are a whole number of things, discussions that can be done to bring active learning to the classroom setting. We know that active learning enhances student learning. In a large and very rigorous meta-analysis done recently on hundreds of STEM courses, there was definitive evidence presented that active learning practices actually improve student performance on exams. In fact, given the strength of this evidence, one might wonder if it's even ethical to teach a course without active learning. In kinesiology, active learning is alive and well. In a study of introductory biomechanics classes, the vast majority of instrucors reported that they were using active learning. But in that study, that was beyond the scope to know whether there was, and whether learning was actually impacted by these practices. In a course trying to, in a study trying to tie active learning practice, in this case a game, to exam performance, data tended in that direction but didn't quite get there. And then in another study in a kinesiology course, it was found that not all active learning practices are alike. Comparing clicker versus hand raising, for example, it turns out the students who use the clickers reported an increased understanding of lecture and overall learning gains. So in my world, I'm faced every semester with 100 students who want to learn functional anatomy, musculoskeletal anatomy. And I confess, For years, I taught it in the tried and true traditional way that anatomy classes are taught, which is sit back, enjoy my dozens of slides loaded with information. And oh, I'm contemporary because I've thrown in some videos, but this maybe didn't cut it. In fact, I was teaching the same way that anatomy's been taught literally for hundreds of years. So I decided it was time for me to inject some active learning in my course. So rather than using clickers, I chose to use a technology called Active Learning Platform by Echo 360 that actually was originally created by a U of M faculty member. He spun it off as a start-off, and then it was acquired by Echo 360. And why I chose this particular technology was because it let me put images in front of the students that they could interact with. So it's a web-based student response system, basically. So I could ask the traditional clicker questions, or students could click on images. So I wondered, are these questions affecting the students' learning? And if so, is there a better way? Is one way better than another in this anatomy class for their learning? And the answer is yes. Having the students answer these questions in class was strongly correlated with their exam score. So this is about 200 students over 2 semesters. And what's interesting about this is it didn't even matter if they got the answers right. The fact that they were just participating, they were just clicking, they were engaged in the learning, just that affected their exam scores positively. So did it matter whether these questions were text-based or image-based? And the answer is yes. So in order to answer this question, we had to do multiple linear regression to separate out other factors that affect learning, right? Gender, underrepresented minority status, GPA. Actually, a very strong predictor of how a student is going to do on an exam is what their incoming GPA is. So what we found here is that image participation, that when you control for GPA, participating in the text-based questions dropped out. And it was just the image-based questions that affected the student learning. So what this tells us is that using data, using some learning analytics, you can actually investigate which of your practices might be more effective for another than another, and change your teaching practice, in this case, to help reach students who might not have such a strong GPA. Your low knowledge learners, it looks like the image-based questions are most effective for them, or particularly effective for them. Okay, so buzz in the hallways where it all happens, and faculty talking to faculty, and there were 2 individuals who used this technology way back when. You might guess who those 2 people were. But then, moving forward, you can see we picked up a few other professors who heard about how this was working. One brave soul even used it in 2 courses. The yellow professor switched to another course, and as academic time moved forward, you will note that academic time is quite different than the exponential time we heard about yesterday. But little by little, the practice is spreading amongst our faculty, including incoming faculty just arriving recently to our school. So these hats represent real people. They span 3 of our 4 departments. They span all of our faculty ranks and all of our class sizes from small to large. So one problem with active learning is that it takes time. So a faculty member has to take content out of their course to allow for active learning to happen. So this is a dilemma when we think that our job as professors is to transmit information. What are we going to do with that other content? So one response to that is to flip the class, that is to move some of that content online where students interact with it, and then they come back to class with knowledge both from the professor and from online, and allows time for active learning. So flipped classes are really a subset of a broader category, blended learning. And definitions vary on what exactly blended learning is, but it's a combination of some percentage of online learning and then face-to-face learning that's going to optimize student engagement with the material. So the thing that's interesting about blended learning is that we might think that the only kind of learner interaction that is important is between the student and the instructor. But in fact, students can learn in other ways too. They can learn from each other, and they can learn from the content directly. So in a flipped class, for example, those video tutorials are a way for content to be shared online. But learners can also interact in a blended fashion with each other, giving each other feedback. The students can interact with the instructor online through assignment feedback, or maybe if the instructor moderates an online discussion, for example. So it's a little bit broader than just the flipped class notion. Blended learning is very effective. And in fact, evidence is showing that blended learning is even more effective for student learning than face-to-face classes. And that learning effect is even strengthened when the online material is expository or collaborative. There's nothing magic about online materials. In blended classes, it might be the fact that there is more time to learn because it's distributed in different times and places. There are additional resources that are created for these blended classes that might help learners, and that there are a number of different types of interactions between the students, which can also help with their learning. So at Michigan, we were really interested in jumping into this arena of blended learning. So a group of 5 faculty members came together and formed a faculty learning community. We partnered with other experts on campus in academic innovation and in our Center for Research on Teaching and Learning so that we could learn how to do this, how to make videos, how to use digital pedagogies, how to assess learning. We were new to this game. So our 5 courses here were one on concussion, where the students really looked at the relationship between how the media represents concussion and scientific literature on concussion, and then how to mediate that for specific target audiences like a coach, a parent, or the athletes themselves. Our clinical gait analysis class, the students had a chance to actually work with patient case histories and to learn to apply their biomechanical knowledge to clinical reports. Child motor development, the students went out to a local preschool and applied what they learned about child development and invented games for the children to play that might foster development of those skills. Exercise and cardiovascular technology, the students used wearable technology. You'll hear more about that in a few moments. And in the motion capture class, students experienced the whole arc of scientific inquiry from coming up with their own question, to designing an experiment to answer it, to collecting and analyzing the data, interpreting the results, and then disseminating the findings. So we use the same structure in all of these courses. They were all blended. At least 70% of the face-to-face time was spent with active hands-on learning activities. The courses were collaborative. Students worked in teams. They worked on extended projects, sometimes semester long, and they all made presentations at the end. The projects were all involved with real-world problems, and we provided our Gen Zers with lots of the feedback that they want, and the assessment that they received depended on the work that they did rather than on high-stakes exams. So how did we evaluate learning? We used the AAC and U value rubrics, and we focused on a particular set of higher level skills: critical thinking, inquiry and analysis skills, quantitative literacy, oral communication, and information literacy. And we wanted to know if the students achieved any of our goals for them. So not only were we having to learn how to blend courses, the students were needing to learn how to take blended courses. They had never experienced anything like this. There were no tests. How did they know if they had learned anything? So we asked them. That was one way to find out, and you can see that they felt that they had acquired some useful skills in these courses that they might actually be able to use in their future workplaces. The students really liked the online materials. They really supported what was going on face-to-face in the classrooms, and they recommended highly that more of their courses would include videos for their learning. We assessed the learning using these value rubrics. So for each skill, shown here as inquiry and analysis, there are various dimensions of that skill that are specified, and as well as performance levels, moving from right to left in terms of the level of skill development. So we could look at assignments during the term and mark students for where they were at that point in the term with respect to the dimensions of these skills. And as you can see here, all the curves trended upward. So each of the colors represents one of our courses. Each of the little graphs represents a dimension of one of these skills. The horizontal axis is week in semester when that skill was assessed. And then the vertical lines there are the performance level for each of those dimensions. So we took this as an indication that this blended learning was effective. This blended course format was effective for our student learning. So there are 5 adopters. We picked up another one the next year, and it's continuing to spread, again, at academic time, throughout our faculty. Interesting, the blue professor there has blended her scientific writing course. Okay. So with that, I've talked to you a bit about active learning and blended learning. I'm going to turn things over to Pete. He's going to make a few more comments about blended learning, and then share with you his exciting work with gameful learning.
Thank you, Melissa. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me here with Melissa to make these presentations. So I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to build on what Melissa just mentioned and talk to you a little bit about my blended course. There it is. And then I'm also going to have, as Melissa described, some vignettes about my gamified course. So my blended course, the one that Melissa was just talking about, I focused on, as she mentioned, wearable technology. So this has been an exciting piece because students are often very excited about it. We learned lots yesterday about technology and our students' interest in this. And so in this case, I've been trying to keep up with different wearable technology. As I asked people what they think of when they think of wearable technology, what do you think they say? What's the first thing I hear? Thank you, very, very universal there. Fitbit. So I just try to leave Fitbit kind of off of my scale. Everybody has lots of experience with that, lots of opinions about that. And so I try to focus on other things. A couple years back, the first time I offered it, we did actually have a Skype session with someone at Fitbit, and so that was fun, but of late we've been focused on other technology. So these technologies sort of vary based on different systems. So some are focused on electrocardiogram and accelerometry, GPS. This is Catapult, which is a team system which Michigan Athletics uses. So we have data sets that we can use from them. This is a technology that looks at skeletal muscle oxygenation, which as an exercise physiologist is exciting for me. This is EMG sensors that are built into both shorts as well as upper body equipment. And so the students are usually quite interested in that. And then yesterday, actually, we heard about the interest in augmented and virtual reality. And so we actually have opportunity to work with Microsoft HoloLens, which is augmented reality. So students are usually pretty excited by the different types of technologies. So Melissa gave a nice introduction about this setup in blended learning. And so I used this same slide just to add on something that I have attempted to bring to this course, and that is the learner to industry link. So in this case, as I mentioned, I try to bring a Skype, for example, a Skype interview with people that are out in industry so that the students have a chance to hear from them. What are their challenges? What kind of people are they looking for to work in their companies? I hear from a lot of students that are interested in working in this field of wearable technology. So from a standpoint of the learner-industry combination, we'll have these Skype call discussions. In some cases, we've actually been able to bring people in from the outside. So we've had in-class guests coming from industry, from companies that have things commercially available, or in the case of one case, I had something that was pre-market, which I thought was a really great idea until the pre-market things really never ever worked. So that was a little disappointing. Students were all excited, like, wow, we have access before anybody else. And then, the batteries were exploding and all kinds of crazy things. So it didn't turn out quite as good as I thought. And then we've been able to have them write up either kind of a write-up about what they're doing and send this out to people in the industry. In some cases, end up with correspondence. Hey, we're trying to do this, but we wish you had this. In some of the cases with these companies, I have a relationship such that I can actually get them to respond to my students. So not always for sure, but something that I'm working towards. So these are upper class students. So typically they've had my exercise physiology course, or maybe I've taught it or one of my colleagues. And so they have a pretty good background in exercise physiology. I will review, as Melissa mentioned, we have these pre-class videos. And so they'll watch these pre-class videos, which will kind of handhold them through things that are relevant to the technology we'll be talking about. And then the students are kind of go into these quick groups and design experiments around that particular wearable technology. And we'll actually collect data and then do a kind of a quick presentation. So for each of the technologies that we talk about, we try to go through this cycle here, and ultimately with an interest in trying to interact with those tech companies, which is sort of my goal, but as you can imagine, a difficult one. So yesterday we had some discussion about being the sage on the stage or the guide on the side. So this apparently is my example of guide on the side. I'm like leaning up against the wall and chatting with some of my students. But a challenge for this course is that in order to be able to do this, I can only offer it to so many students at a time. And so in this case, we originally had, I think, limited to 18, 19 students. This term they were like, can't you do 24 or more? So it becomes a little bit of a challenge if we're trying to be able to be this guide on the side to many groups. It becomes difficult. In addition, of course, I need the wearable technology to be able to go around. And so the more groups I have, the more challenging that becomes. And then, though it is my goal to have these industry partners be involved, that, of course, is a very difficult thing because they're doing their own things. They have their own goals. My class is something that hopefully they are interested in, but I certainly can't control on what time frame they might be responding to us. I throw this one in, though, just as a great success. This was last semester, and we had a guy from Microsoft come in related to our use of the Microsoft HoloLens. So we had someone from Microsoft in the classroom, and so I think my students are like, wow. Between the actual augmented reality technology and then actually having someone from Microsoft there to tell a little bit about what they're trying to do with that technology, that was certainly an exciting day. So the other vignette I want to talk about is my gamified course. And so, although it's hard to see maybe in this room, I just want for you to focus for a minute on this top portion. So this is describing the points distribution at the end of last fall's class. And so, I don't know how many of you can see this, but this says 10,000, 15,000, 20,000, all the way up to 35,000 points. So the first thing about gamified is that in many cases, you kind of have these big numbers. You're not like, well, the course is 100 points over the semester or 300 points. Often in a gamified course, you might have big numbers, and I certainly do here. But my question to you is, what do you think an A was in this course? How many points do you think students needed to get an A? Where on this line here from 10 to 35,000? Any guesses? 30,000 would be here, so that would mean I had 3 A's. So, what's that? 25, so 25 would be here, which means I had a handful of A's. This is a course of 250 students, so these are the outliers and they represent individual people. So in this case, I have about 200 people in this bucket here, and I have 50 kind of spread outside of here. And so the A was right here, okay? So this might concern you, and so this is definitely a piece that made me hesitant to talk about this for years, I believe. It was just last fall was the first time I presented it to my faculty colleagues, because I was really nervous that they would be like, what kind of a distribution is this? So in this case, what we're seeing is that this group right here has aimed for a certain goal, and they've attained that goal, and then they put on the brakes and they say, we're done, okay? So that's kind of the way a gamified course often goes, and we can talk about that philosophy as there's time. So this is a picture here from my gamified course. This is that actual spread of grades. So in this case, once they reach 21,000 points, then they have an A. And so this is what we're seeing is 21,000 points is right about here. And down towards 0. This is my class right now. no one has attained yet a D-. Everybody starts at 0 points and they're working their way up. Okay? So there are some students that are like, what do you mean I am failing? Of course you're failing. This is a class where we're going to accumulate points over time. So this is my current class, 255 students, they're all failing. Okay? But they know from past and from understanding the rules of the game that they're going to accumulate points over time. All right, so it's a relatively large course, about 250 students. This particular classroom only holds 250 students. And you'll see a lot of technology in front of them, so I'm using the active learning platform that Melissa mentioned as a means of collecting participation information or participation points from them. You can see here, if you can see the screen, that I'm using old-fashioned hand raising as well. So I want to tell you a little bit about this class because it's important towards why I decided to make this change. So this is over as many semesters since winter 2015. I've had 1,700 or so students in here. This is the breakdown. About 24% of them are from the sciences. And by this, it means from the Literature and Science and Arts College. And so that's the biggest percentage. The next percentage are from business, and then social sciences, engineering, then the first kinesiology, the movement science students, sports marketing, and athletic training. So the majority of these students are not kinesiology students. And in fact, it's quite a mix of students with a background in the sciences and students that don't have a background in the sciences. And that made it a real challenge to teach it the sort of traditional way because the students in the sciences are like, well, this science is so cheesy. We know it well beyond this. And if I raise it up to what they would want, the business school, the social science kids, they drop it. They're like, I can't understand what we're doing in here. So I decided to go to this gamified structure. One other piece that I'll mention is that the majority of the students in here are seniors. There are no prereqs for this course. So why is it that there's so many seniors in my course? Anyone? Demand, right. So seniority in this case in their registration, and so it's a popular course. So lots of students are interested, but they can only get in once they have that seniority. So yesterday we heard from Ryan Jenkins talking about the Millennial Manual. We've given some out today. I chose my own name, but I figured that wouldn't be appropriate to take the book. But actually I had sort of a preview of some of the pieces in here, and I pulled out 7 things that he highlights in here, game elements for millennials. And I really thought this was interesting because I've been using this gamified structure for some time, and in fact, I think most of these have been incorporated into my course. So we'll go through these. So the first is offer options. And so this I really learned about from folks on campus. This is Barry Fishman and his former doctoral student, now just graduated, so Dr. Holman, Kate Holman. They came up with this application called Gradecraft. And so Gradecraft is what I'm using as the platform for this Gameful course. So offering options was kind of the first thing as they introduced this years ago to me, that, hey, you can offer options. And I began to think, okay, what does that mean? What am I going to do? So this is a template of something that somebody might use as options. So there's 12,000 points, and there's this core number of points where you're like, well, we have to teach this. And they have to be evaluated on this, but then they have some choice over here of different things that they could do on top. And this is something used certainly in lots of courses. In my case, I decided to just go all in on choice. And so it was a really radical move for me, and I felt nervous again about it from a standpoint of my colleagues, what they would think. But what I did is I decided I'm just going to make everything optional. Okay, so nothing is required. Everything's optional. As you can see, right now all my students are failing, right? So if you take it as everything's optional, yeah, you don't have to do anything. You fail, of course, but everything's optional. So, and the other piece that I really liked about this is by providing this perspective, now they needed to step back and say, what am I going to do? Okay, so in this case, you might say, well, it looks like everybody got an A, must be pretty cheesy. So 21,000 points, though, in this case, there's about 36,000 and growing number of points possible out there that they could work towards. And as we'll see here, it's not as if there is a really simple way. They need to be involved in many things. This is a little link from the Gradecraft site. And so in this case, as I've already described, students are earning up. They're starting at 0 and working their way up. This increases autonomy because they need to decide what it is they're going to do in order to earn this grade that they want. And then they have freedom to fail. So they could start things and then decide like, wow, this is way too hard. I'm not even going to do this anymore. And it's no problem. They're not going backwards. They're just not going forwards. So there are more than 35,000 points available and growing. So we're trying to add new things over time. I made this scale up to 21,000, though it doesn't quite show up here, in order to provide you some perspective here on how many points you get for different activities in this course. So when I first said I was teaching 250 kids, someone who is highly efficient said, well, of course you're just going to give them 2 exams, they'll both be multiple choice, no big deal. Okay, and I was like, oh yeah, if only you knew what I'm actually doing. Okay, so in this case, I do have 2 multiple choice exams that I'm giving, and they're actually worth 3,000 points each. And so if students got 100% of both of those exams, they have 6,000 points. Okay, they failed the course if that's all they did, right? That's the way this course is set up, is for them to really be engaging in lots of different things. So there are some points from the active learning platform for participation, but that's pretty small. There are lots of challenges that they can do. So we have a physical activity challenge and a dietary challenge that students can take on, and they're basically receiving points for writing up reflections about how they're doing in their challenge. So it's something that often students will really like about this course. And there are writing assignments. There are lit reviews that students can work on. And you can imagine that there's many are like, hey, I'm going to make sure I don't have to do a lit review. Okay? But some that are like, wow, this is great. I can do that. I want to do that. So the next thing that was on the list from the book was provide hints. And so I was kind of like, am I providing hints? Then I thought, I think I am. So how many of you are familiar with the application called Piazza? So a very small number of hands. So Piazza is actually a great resource, and especially for a class this large. It allows students to sort of write their question in here, and for myself or any of the students that are assisting me with this class to respond to them. And so this is really helpful because, as you know, we get so many questions like, even though it's on the syllabus, you know, what about this? What happens if this happens? So just to give you one example, I kind of blew this one up here to show you. This is from this week. Somebody said, under the weather, what happens if we fall sick during the physical challenge? So they're afraid if they, on the physical challenge, they said, hey, I'm going to exercise every day for this number of minutes, and now they're sick and they can't do that they're not going to get those points. But of course, we're not that unreasonable. And so in this case, one of my student assistants came back and said, well, you'll explain that you were sick and describe this in your reflection. Okay, but make sure you follow the rules and submit your weekly reflection. So it's just a nice way for us to try to keep up. And related to this idea of providing hints, there will be students who are kind of like, I'm confused by this. Who can help me? Can somebody help me? And a really useful thing is not only can we see this, but if these are not private questions, then other students can see these. And it's so great when other students can say, hey, dummy, that's in the syllabus, because I can't really say that, right? But in this case, they will say that. They'll say like, this has already been answered. And they can actually come in here and search and say, hey, my question's about assignment 1. And they can search that and they can say, let me look and see what questions have been asked about this. So it's really helpful. We actually give a badge. Anybody in the room giving badges to students? So there's no points for these badges, but this is another millennial kind of thing. Is students are like, hey, I really got noticed. I got a badge. Okay? And so we actually give a badge for what we call our prominent Piazza partner. Okay? For students that are actually answering other students' questions, then we actually give a badge for that. It has no purpose in life other than the students are like, hey, I got a badge. Okay? So, but they are happy. In some cases, they're just like, what do I have to do to get this badge? Okay? So it's great. So if they're happy, and I'm happy, in this case, really happy if they're answering those dumb questions that nobody else wants to answer. Okay, so next is give control. So again, in this case, Gradecraft is really helpful for me. So the Gradecraft, for those of you that use Canvas, how many in the room use Canvas as their, wow, okay, so the learning management system that we use is Canvas. Gradecraft can be used as a standalone learning management system, but in this case, I'm using it as an add-on to Canvas. And so in this case, you'll see if you use Canvas, you might be looking for where does it talk about grades. I basically took that out. I don't show them that. And I use Gradecraft as my way for them to look at their grades. In this case, I'm showing an example from a student from this term. They've only accumulated, I think, 1,050 points so far. And what I'm showing you is that they can go in, sorry, I only have one screen here, and they have these little sliders where they can say, hey, I'm going to work on this one. And I'm going to be conservative and expect I'll get 80% of these points, 80% of these, 70% of these. Or they could say, I don't show that on here, but they could say, I don't think I'm going to do this one, or I'm not going to take exam 2. And they can begin to sort of say, how am I going to achieve this? So up on the top here, it's showing the different grade cuts. So as I mentioned, everybody right now is below the D-, which is right here. But as we work up, this is a D and C, D+, and a C-, etc., all the way up to the A here. So they can basically go in and start to say, hey, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And then, they can kind of see what actually happened. So in green here are points they've actually received. In blue are points that they're expecting to pursue. Okay? Delivered development. So yes, Tom, thank you. So delivered development is an important one. So what we are trying to do here is trying to make sure that when it comes to these really big points that we're preparing students to do well on those. And so of course the classic one are exams. So they're at 3,000 points each. So a traditional class would do this as well. So we're providing these material quizzes that cover about 1/3 of each exam material. And every day we're providing practice quizzes that are for no points. On the side of the lit review, if students are thinking about doing that, you can appreciate, having seen my grade, what these students are coming from. You can probably appreciate that if you talk about a lit review, they all have different ideas. If you talk about scientific articles, they all have different ideas. So in this case, we began to lay this out in 3 different steps. One was they provide us an idea and a rationale and one original scientific article. Okay, and so as you can imagine, there are many ideas out there about an original scientific article. So this is often a sort of first step for students who have never written a scientific literature review. So we're trying to provide them that development over time. Promote collaboration. Since I'm short on time, I'll just admit that I'm really not doing this. So in this class, I'm sort of leaving them to doing all their own work. But I will say that this team, and this is about the number of students that assist me with this class, the team, we're highly collaborative at trying to get this grading done and trying to do it as the millennials want. They want that immediate feedback. So we have a lot of work to do in this case. So though the assignments are not collaborative, our work is. Communicate consequence. This is a great one that I really love about a gamified course, is that you can be harsh. And in this case, you're not, keeping them out of medical school. Anybody ever heard this? You're keeping me out of medical school. I'm like, wow, okay. So in this case, on day 1, I'm very clear about some things. And one of those things is that if you're cheating, then you're going to get a 0. And another thing is one that I think many of you will appreciate, that we're going to grade what you submit. Whatever it is, we're grading that, okay? So if you submitted the wrong file, I'm sorry, but we're going to grade that, okay? So how many of you have experienced this? How many have experienced a corrupted file being submitted? Okay, so this is an important piece, corruptafile.net. Did you know this exists? So students can just go in and corrupt a file, and then they submit it. Their actual byline is corrupt file online, deliver on time. Okay, so this is kind of what we're up against, is that students are really kind of taking advantage of our empathy, and they're like, oh, what, it's corrupt? Oh my gosh, can I submit this now? So, and this is, a week later that you're finally getting around, right, to grading that. Course Hero was mentioned yesterday. Thanks to Melinda Solomon for talking about this whole blatant academic dishonesty. In this case, it could even be accidental, right? So there's lots of things that happen accidentally, but students need to make it a priority. And in this case, I'm not keeping them out of medical school. They could still get an A, even if they get a 0 on this particular assignment. So this is what we do. We grade what they submit, and I make a big deal about it on day 1. And they kind of grit their teeth when they make a mistake, and we get a 0 for submitting the wrong file. And finally, highlight progress. So Gradecraft helps a lot with this because they're providing students with lots of kind of updates. This is from the end of last term. This is actually, I kind of cherry-picked the student who hit exactly at 21,000 points, which was an A. In this case, you'll see they had no badges, which was okay for them, but we do provide several different possibilities for badges. And this was providing them perspective on where they were. So they were right here. Here's that batch that I was talking about, and here's the spread. So there's a student up here with 35,000 points. Okay, so you might say, what are they doing? So they're achieving, and they're excited to achieve. And that's one of the best things about this setup, is that there are students that are going to be up here, and you're just like, wow, like they are really going for it, and they really like this. So even though I think it's like a really high number of assignments to even take on, they're excited to do that. So low score, 11,000, high score, 36,000. So a pretty big spread, but what you see is most students do what they need to get up there to an A. So the continuing challenges are to decide what to do about this distribution I have. I could see that nobody was really seeing what I was doing. They were not guessing that an A was right here, but that's really the way it is. So what deserves an A is an important question. So is it too much? Is it too little? So this is one of those challenges. Should this be a bell-shaped curve? You can kind of see it's almost a bell-shaped curve. And then how do you keep up with the grading of all these assignments? This is a struggle, of course. But what I have done is I'm finding students that are so excited to help. And so they're just kind of like, I'm totally excited. I'm going to do this next semester. Can I do this next semester? So they're excited. So the movement science students that are juniors and seniors have good background in this. They're looking over all these reflections, for example, or they're helping to grade the dietary recalls, etc. How do you deter the Course Hero cheaters? You need to mix up these assignments. So if they can just go to Course Hero and pull down an assignment and submit it, and they are going to get all the points, that's a big problem. In my case, we switch those things up around. We change these assignments enough that somebody can't just pull something off the internet and submit it. And when they do, we know that what they've done, they're talking about the wrong person in a case study or something like that. So we have found a way to try to deter them. And then the development of new and relevant assignments. So one of the things that we're trying to do is continue to have lots of new things. So we've added one, for example, related to the microbiome, as well as 23andMe, trying to get students to think about what is the value. Is there value in doing something like 23andMe? On U of M's campus, there's actually something called Genes for Good, which is totally free and gives the same information. So we try to introduce that topic to them and let them think about that. So I'm sure that Tom is giving me you're out of time, Bodary. So I will wrap it up here, and Melissa and I will be happy to take questions.